It was supposed to be the happiest night of the year. But by morning, 5 children had disappeared without a trace. How could a joyful night end in unimaginable terror? December 24th, 1992. The small town of Ridgewood, Ohio, population barely 3,000, was blanketed in fresh snow. The kind of snow that makes everything look like a Christmas card. White picket fences, decorated storefronts, wreaths hanging on every door. This was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where doors stayed unlocked, where children played outside until dark without a worry in the world. The Miller house sat at the end of Maple Street, a modest 2-story home with blue shutters and a wraparound porch. David and Margaret Miller had spent the entire day preparing for Christmas Eve dinner. Margaret, a kindergarten teacher with soft brown hair always pulled back in a practical ponytail, had been baking since dawn. The scent of cinnamon rolls, roast turkey, and apple pie filled every corner of the house. David, a mechanic with calloused hands and a gentle smile, had strung lights along the porch railing that afternoon, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. Their children were the heartbeat of that home. Emily, 12 years old, the responsible one with her mother's brown eyes and her father's stubborn determination. She'd help Margaret set the table, making sure each fork and knife was perfectly aligned. Lucas, 10, wild-haired and always covered in some kind of dirt or snow, had spent the morning building a snowman in the front yard. Sarah, 8, wore her favorite red scarf everywhere, even indoors, and had been singing Christmas carols off-key for hours. Tommy, 6, clutched his toy truck like it was made of gold, running it along the windowsills and making engine noises that drove everyone slightly crazy. And then there was Grace, just 4 years old, the baby of the family with blonde curls and a gap-toothed smile that could melt anyone's heart. Around 5 in the evening, as the December sun began its early descent, the children bundled up in their winter coats. Emily helped Grace with her mittens, carefully pulling each finger into place. Margaret stood at the kitchen window, watching them through the frosted glass as they tumbled out into the yard. Their laughter carried on the cold air. Phew, innocent, safe. David had left for work around 4:30. He worked the evening shift at Henderson's auto shop, fixing last-minute emergencies for travelers passing through town on their way to family gatherings. He'd kissed Margaret goodbye, ruffled Tommy's hair, and promised to be home by 9, just in time to help hang the stockings and set out cookies for Santa. Margaret returned to her baking, humming along to the Christmas music playing softly on the radio. Every few minutes, she'd glance out the window to check on the children. They were making snow angels now, their small bodies flopping into the powder, arms and legs sweeping wide. She smiled. This was exactly what Christmas was supposed to feel like. By 6:15, darkness had settled over Ridgewood like a heavy blanket. The streetlights flickered on, casting warm yellow pools along the sidewalk. Margaret wiped her hands on her apron and moved to the back door. Time to call the children in. The temperature was dropping fast, and she could see her breath even inside the mudroom. She opened the door, cold air rushing in. Emily. Lucas. Time to come inside. Nothing. Sarah. Tommy. Grace. Come on. Dinner's almost ready. Still nothing. Margaret stepped out onto the back porch, her slippers crunching on a thin layer of ice. The yard was empty. The snow was disturbed, evidence of their play everywhere, but no children. She walked around the side of the house, calling their names louder now. The front yard was empty too. The snowman Lucas had built stood silent and alone. A small knot of worry began to form in her stomach. They couldn't have gone far. Maybe they'd run to the neighbor's house. The Williams family 2 doors down had children around the same age. Margaret grabbed her coat and walked quickly down the sidewalk, her breath coming faster now, though she told herself it was just from the cold. Mrs. Williams answered the door with flour on her hands and a confused expression. No, she hadn't seen the Miller children. Her own kids were inside watching a Christmas special on television. Had Margaret checked the park? The park. Of course. Margaret felt a flutter of relief mixed with annoyance. She'd specifically told them not to go to the park this late. Emily knew better. Margaret headed back to the house to grab her car keys. She'd drive down there, give them a good scolding, and bring them home for a warm dinner. Everything would be fine. But when she returned to the house, something made her stop. The back door was slightly ajar. She knew she'd closed it, hadn't she? Margaret pushed it open slowly, a strange feeling crawling up her spine. The kitchen was exactly as she'd left it. The oven timer ticking. The Christmas music still playing. But something felt wrong. The air felt different. Heavier. She checked every room. Upstairs. Downstairs. The basement. Empty. All of their coats were gone. Their snow boots. But their presents sat untouched beneath the Christmas tree, wrapped in bright paper with their names written in Margaret's careful handwriting. 7 o'clock. Margaret called the Williams again. Then the Hendersons. The Pattersons. The church. No one had seen them. By 7:30, she was driving through the streets, her high beams cutting through the darkness, scanning every shadow, every snowbank. Nothing. She drove to the park. The swings hung motionless, dusted with snow. The slide was empty. No footprints. No sign that anyone had been there since the morning. By 8 o'clock, Margaret's hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone as she dialed the police station. Her voice cracked as she spoke to the dispatcher. 5 children. Missing. Christmas Eve. Please send someone. Officer Robert Chen arrived first, his patrol car's lights casting red and blue across the snow. He was young, only 26, and Ridgewood didn't see much crime beyond the occasional drunk and disorderly. He took out his notepad, asking Margaret to describe what happened. When had she last seen them? What were they wearing? Did they mention going anywhere? More police arrived. Chief Harrison, a man who'd known the Miller children since they were born, stood in the living room with his hat in his hands, his face grave. They organized a search party. Neighbors poured out of their homes, grabbing flashlights and forming groups. The temperature had dropped to 20 degrees. If the children were outside, they were in danger. David pulled into the driveway at 8:45, Christmas presents stacked in the passenger seat, completely unaware. He saw the police cars and his heart stopped. He was running before he'd even fully parked, leaving the driver's door open, the engine still running. Margaret collapsed into his arms, sobbing. The children, all 5 of them, gone. By the time David came home from work, the house was empty, and so were the streets. The snow had begun to fall again, heavy and silent, covering everything, covering whatever might have happened, covering any trail that might have led to the children. Where did the children go? The search began immediately. Within an hour, over 100 people had gathered at the Miller house. Volunteers from the church, teachers from Margaret's school, mechanics from David's shop. Everyone who knew the family. Everyone who'd waved to those children on the street, who'd watched them grow. Chief Harrison divided people into groups. 10 volunteers each, equipped with flashlights, whistles, and radios borrowed from the fire department. They would search in expanding circles from the Miller house. The woods to the north, the fields to the east, the old quarry to the south. Every building, every shed, every place a child might hide or be hidden. The temperature continued to drop. 18 degrees now. The volunteers' breath came out in thick clouds as they trudged through the snow, calling the children's names until their voices went hoarse. Emily, Lucas, Sarah, Tommy, Grace. Over and over. The words became a desperate chant echoing through the frozen night. David and Margaret couldn't sit still. Despite the police urging them to stay home in case the children returned, they were out searching too. Margaret's face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. She kept touching her pocket, where she'd stuffed Grace's favorite stuffed rabbit. The one Grace never went anywhere without. Margaret had found it on Grace's bed, forgotten, or left behind. Officer Chen coordinated with the neighboring towns. Alerts went out to every police station within a 50-mile radius. Be on the lookout for 5 children, ages 4 to 12. Last seen around 6 p.m. Christmas Eve. possibly in danger. The search continued through the night. Flashlight beams crisscrossed the darkness like searchlights. Dogs were brought in, canine units from the county police. They sniffed the children's bedrooms, picking up scents, then headed out into the night, handlers struggling to keep up as the dogs pulled toward the woods. But something strange happened. The dogs tracked the scent to the edge of the property, near the back fence. Then they stopped, circled, whined. The handlers tried again, but the dogs seemed confused, as if the scent simply vanished at that spot, like the children had evaporated into thin air. Around midnight, someone found something. A volunteer named Patricia Donovan, a school librarian who'd read stories to the Miller children dozens of times, called out. Her voice cut through the night, sharp with urgency. People came running, their feet crunching through the snow. There, caught on the lower branches of a pine tree about 30 yards from the Miller house, was a piece of red fabric. Sarah's scarf, the one she wore everywhere. It was torn, as if it had been ripped away. Patricia had marked the spot with her flashlight, not touching anything, her hands trembling. Police photographed it, bagged it, examined the area around the tree. There were footprints in the snow, but they were jumbled, confused. Adult footprints mixed with smaller ones. The snow had been disturbed, pushed around, as if there'd been some kind of struggle, or as if someone had deliberately obscured the tracks. Chief Harrison's jaw tightened. This wasn't children wandering off to play. This was something else. Something darker. 20 minutes later, another discovery. Lucas's sled, found abandoned near the tree line. The same sled he'd been dragging around all afternoon, racing down the small hill in their backyard. It was lying on its side, half buried in snow. Next to it, barely visible, was one of Grace's mittens. The small pink one with the white snowflake pattern that Margaret had knitted herself. Margaret made a sound when she saw it, something between a sob and a scream. David caught her before she collapsed, holding her upright, though he looked like he might fall apart himself. The evidence was building a picture. The children had been in the backyard. They'd moved toward the woods. And then, what? What had happened in those trees? A neighbor, Bernard Fletcher, 72 years old and partially deaf, came forward around 1 in the morning. He'd been watching television with the volume toned up loud, he explained apologetically. But around 6:30, he'd gotten up to close his window because of the cold. That's when he'd heard something. Dogs barking. Not just one or two, but several, all at once. Frantic barking that had made him pause. He'd looked out his window, which faced the woods behind the Miller property. He'd seen something. He wasn't sure what. The light was bad, and his eyesight wasn't what it used to be. But there'd been movement in the trees. A dark shape. Maybe a person. Maybe more than one. And he thought, maybe, he'd heard a vehicle. An engine starting. But he couldn't be sure. It might have been from the street. Officer Chen pressed him for details. What kind of vehicle? What kind of dark shape? Bernard shook his head, frustrated with himself. Large, maybe. A van or truck. Dark-colored. Black or dark blue. But he couldn't say for certain. It had been there for just a moment, and then it was gone. Other neighbors were interviewed. The Pattersons, directly next door, had heard nothing unusual. But they'd been hosting family from out of town, the house full of people, music playing, children running around. They might not have noticed anything outside. The Hendersons on the other side reported hearing a vehicle around 6:30, but they'd assumed it was someone driving past. Cars came and went all the time on their street. Nothing had seemed strange about it. But Mrs. Henderson added something else. She'd been in her kitchen, which faced the woods, when she'd noticed their outdoor sensor light had triggered. The one that came on when something moved past it. She'd looked out, thinking it might be a deer. They got those sometimes. But instead, she'd seen what looked like a figure. A person, standing at the edge of the tree line, just beyond the circle of light. Watching. She'd only seen it for a second before it moved back into the darkness. She thought it was odd but hadn't been alarmed. Sometimes teenagers cut through the woods. Sometimes hunters came through. She'd forgotten about it completely until the police started asking questions. When had this been? Officer Chen asked. Around 6, she thought. Maybe a little after. The same time the children had been outside playing. Chief Harrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Someone had been watching the Miller children. And then they'd vanished. The search party found nothing else that night. No more clues. No sign of the children. By 3 in the morning, people were exhausted, frozen, their hope beginning to crack. But no one wanted to stop. No one wanted to be the one to give up. Because giving up meant accepting that those children might not be coming home. The search would continue, Chief Harrison announced. At first light, they'd expand the radius. Bring in more dogs. More volunteers. Check every building, every abandoned structure, every place within 10 miles. They would find these children. But privately, as he stood in his patrol car drinking cold coffee and watching the dark woods, Harrison felt a terrible certainty settling in his gut. The torn scarf. The abandoned sled. The confused tracks. The witness reports of a vehicle. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't children wandering off. Someone had taken them. Someone had been watching, waiting. And whoever it was had known exactly what they were doing. By the time David came home from work, the house was empty. And so were the streets. The search party had found almost nothing. Not a trace of the children. But what they did find would shock everyone. Because the small clues they'd discovered told a story. A story of something planned. Something deliberate. Something evil that had crept into their peaceful town on Christmas Eve and stolen 5 innocent children while their mother baked cookies and their father worked late. And the most terrifying part, they'd done it without leaving a clear trail. Without making a sound that anyone could definitively identify. Almost as if they'd done this before. Christmas Day, 1992. While families across America were opening presents and drinking hot chocolate, Ridgewood was in the grip of something dark and incomprehensible. The Miller house had become command central for the investigation. Police vehicles lined the street. Television news vans had started arriving from Columbus and Cleveland. The small-town Christmas tragedy was becoming a national story. Margaret hadn't slept. She sat at the kitchen table, the same table where her children had eaten breakfast just yesterday morning, clutching a cup of coffee she couldn't bring to her lips. David paced, back and forth, until Chief Harrison gently suggested he sit down before he wore a hole in the floor. The FBI had been called. 2 agents arrived at dawn, Special Agent Caroline Pierce and Michael Donovan. They'd worked child abduction cases before, seen things they wished they could forget. But even they seemed shaken by the circumstances. 5 children, all at once. No witnesses. Minimal evidence. A timeline measured in minutes. They set up in the Miller living room, maps spread across the coffee table, photographs pinned to a makeshift board. The red scarf. The sled. The mitten. These items told a story. But what story? Agent Pierce studied the photos of the woods where the items were found. The scarf was torn, she said quietly to Donovan. See here. The fabric's ripped, not cut. That suggests force. Possibly a struggle. But there's no blood, Donovan replied. No signs of injury on the fabric. Doesn't mean there wasn't violence. Just means it didn't break skin. They interviewed the neighbors again, this time with more detailed questions. Had anyone seen strangers in the area? Had there been any unusual vehicles parked on the street? Any odd phone calls? Door-to-door salespeople? Repair workers? Nothing. Ridgewood was the kind of place where a strange car got noticed. Where people waved at everyone who drove past. But no one remembered anything unusual. Christmas season brought some extra traffic, people visiting family, but nothing that had raised any red flags. Then Officer Chen brought in something new. He'd been conducting a grid search of the area around where the scarf was found, working slowly, methodically, not wanting to miss anything. And buried in the snow, partially frozen into the ground, he'd found something small. A toy soldier. Blue plastic, maybe 3 inches tall, the kind that came in bags of $100 at the dollar store. Margaret confirmed it. Tommy had a collection of those soldiers. He carried them everywhere, setting up elaborate battles on the kitchen counter, in the bathtub, on his bedroom floor. He must have had one in his pocket. The toy was found 15 yards deeper into the woods than the scarf. Heading north, away from the houses, toward the old logging road that cut through the forest, a road that eventually connected to Route 52, the main highway. The search party pushed deeper into the woods, following this new trail. If Tommy had dropped that toy, maybe he'd dropped others. Maybe there were more breadcrumbs leading to where they'd been taken. But they found nothing else. No more toys. No more pieces of clothing. Just that one small blue soldier, lying in the snow like a tombstone. Around noon, a woman came forward. Judith Martinez, 43, who lived 3 blocks over. She'd been at the grocery store on Christmas Eve, she explained, picking up last-minute items around 5:30. When she'd driven back toward her neighborhood, she'd noticed a van parked on Birch Street, the street that ran parallel to Maple. It had been idling, exhaust puffing into the cold air, but no one was inside that she could see. What had caught her attention was that the van was old, rust-colored, or maybe it was actually rust. One of those full-size vans from the 80s, the kind with no windows in the back. She remembered thinking it was odd, a van like that in their neighborhood. They mostly saw SUVs and sedans in Ridgewood. Had she noticed a license plate? Any identifying marks? She shook her head apologetically. She'd only seen it for a moment as she drove past. She hadn't thought anything of it at the time. Maybe someone visiting family. Maybe a delivery. But now, with the children missing, the memory had nagged at her all night. What if it meant something? Agent Pierce made notes. A van. On a side street. Around the same time the children disappeared. It could be something. It could be nothing. But it was more than they'd had an hour ago. The FBI pulled traffic camera footage from Route 52. Ridgewood didn't have traffic cameras, but the highway did, and anyone leaving town by vehicle would have to use it eventually. They started reviewing hours of grainy footage, looking for vans matching Judith's description. Meanwhile, the physical search continued. Police dogs picked up faint scents in the woods but kept losing them. It was as if the children's trail simply ended. One handler suggested the children might have been carried at some point, which would explain why the dogs couldn't follow them beyond a certain point. Carried. The word made Margaret's stomach turn. Her babies, carried away by strangers. Not walking. Not running. Carried like luggage. That afternoon, another break. A man named Peter Simmons came into the police station. He was a truck driver who'd been passing through Ridgewood on Christmas Eve, delivering a shipment to a warehouse just outside town. He'd stopped at a gas station around 6:45, the one on Route 52 near the edge of town. While he was filling up, he noticed a vehicle at the far end of the lot, near the air pump where it was darker. A van, dark-colored, and there'd been someone moving around in the back, he thought. He couldn't see well, and he hadn't paid much attention. Just gotten his gas and left. But now, hearing about the missing children, he wondered if he should mention it. Had he seen the license plate? No. Had he seen who was in the van? Just a shape. Maybe a man. Medium build. Dark clothes. Nothing distinct. Could the children have been in that van? Peter's face paled. He didn't know. God, he hoped not. But maybe. It was possible. The gas station security cameras were pulled. The footage showed exactly what Peter described. A van. Dark blue or black. Hard to tell in the poor lighting. At 6:50 p.m., it was parked at the edge of the lot. At 7:05, it pulled out and headed west on Route 52. But the angle was wrong. The license plate was never clearly visible. Just shadows and grain. Still, it was something. A timeline. A direction. West on Route 52 meant heading toward the state line, toward Indiana. The FBI contacted police departments along that route. Be on the lookout. 5 missing children. Possible abduction. Suspect driving a dark van, possibly blue, older model. But by now, it was Christmas afternoon. More than 20 hours since the children disappeared. A van could be anywhere. Could have traveled 300 miles in any direction. Could be hidden in a garage or barn. Could have switched vehicles entirely. Chief Harrison felt the hope slipping away. The first 24 hours were critical in abduction cases. After that, the chances of finding victims alive dropped dramatically, and they were already past that window. Then, late on Christmas night, something else emerged. Father Thomas O'Malley from St. Catherine's Church called the police station. He sounded shaken. He'd been going through the church that evening, cleaning up after the Christmas services, when he'd found something tucked beneath one of the pews. A piece of paper, folded carefully, like a note. Officer Chen drove to the church immediately. Father O'Malley led him inside, the church dim and quiet, candles still flickering near the altar. He pointed to the third pew from the back, left side. Right there, he said, wedged between the seat and the back. Chen pulled on gloves and carefully extracted the paper. It was white, standard printer paper, folded into quarters. He unfolded it slowly. The handwriting was neat, almost mechanical. Block letters in black ink. They are safe, but you will never see them again. That was all. No signature. No explanation. Just those 9 words. Chen felt his blood run cold. This wasn't a random note. This was a message. From whoever took the children. A message left in a church. Of all places. During Christmas. Who, or what, was behind these vanishing children? Could someone in the town be hiding a terrible secret? The handwriting was analyzed. The paper was checked for fingerprints. The pews were examined for any other evidence. But there was nothing. Just that note, those terrible words, left like a calling card. A taunt. Because the worst part of the message wasn't what it said. It was what it implied. Someone had taken the time to write this note. To fold it carefully. To place it in the church where they knew it would be found. Someone who wanted the family, the police, the whole town to know. The children were gone. And whoever took them had no intention of giving them back. By December 26th, Ridgewood had transformed into something unrecognizable. The peaceful small town where everyone knew everyone had become a place of suspicion and fear. Neighbors looked at each other differently. Every stranger was a potential suspect. Every unfamiliar vehicle was reported to police. The national news coverage had intensified. CNN, ABC, NBC, all the major networks had picked up the story. 5 children vanishing on Christmas Eve was exactly the kind of tragedy that captured the nation's attention. Reporters swarmed the town, conducting interviews, filming B-roll of the Miller house, the woods, the church where the note had been found. Margaret and David appeared on television, making tearful pleas for whoever had their children to please bring them home. Margaret could barely get the words out, her voice breaking every few seconds. David sat rigid beside her, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful, his hands gripping his knees until his knuckles turned white. The phones at the police station rang constantly. Tips poured in from all over the country. Someone claimed to have seen the children at a rest stop in Pennsylvania. Another caller swore they'd spotted them at a McDonald's in Michigan. A psychic from California insisted she'd had a vision of the children in a white house near water. Every single tip had to be followed up. Agents fanned out across multiple states, chasing leads that almost always turned into dead ends. The children of the rest stop were a family traveling to visit grandparents. The McDonald's sighting was a different group of kids entirely. The psychic's vision was impossible to verify and led nowhere. But amid the chaos and false leads, attention began to focus on someone local. Harold Jenkins, a 6 to 7-year-old man who lived alone in a dilapidated house about a mile from the Miller family. Harold was what people in town called a recluse. He kept to himself, rarely ventured into town, and had let his property fall into disrepair. His yard was overgrown. His windows were often covered. He'd been known to yell at children who cut across his property. Rumors about Harold had circulated for years. Some people claimed he'd had a wife once, but she'd left him decades ago. Others said he'd been fired from a teaching job downstate for inappropriate behavior, though no one could confirm this. The rumors fed on themselves, growing more sinister with each retelling. Now, with 5 children missing, those rumors exploded. Had anyone checked Harold? He'd always seemed strange, angry, antisocial. What if he'd taken the children? What if they were in his house right now? Chief Harrison knew he had to investigate, if only to rule Harold out. On December 27th, he obtained a search warrant and led a team of officers to Harold's property. The house looked even more decrepit up close. Peeling paint, broken gutters, a porch that sagged dangerously. Harold answered the door looking confused and frightened. He was a small man, thin, with wispy gray hair and thick glasses that magnified his watery blue eyes. When he saw the police, he seemed to shrink into himself. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice shaking. They explained. The missing children. The need to search his property. Harold's face went pale. "I didn't. I would never. Those poor children." He let them in without resistance. The inside of the house was cluttered but not filthy. Stacks of books and newspapers everywhere. An old television playing a game show with the volume low. The smell of instant coffee and cigarettes. Officers searched every room. The basement. The attic. The shed out back. They found nothing. No sign of children. No evidence of any crime. Just a lonely old man living in a house that time had forgotten. Harold sat in his kitchen while they searched, tears streaming down his face. "I didn't do anything," he kept saying. "I didn't do anything wrong." They took him to the station anyway. Questioned him for hours. Where was he on Christmas Eve? Home alone, watching television. Could anyone verify that? No. He lived alone. Did he own a van? No. He drove a 1982 big sedan that barely ran. When was the last time he'd seen the Miller children? He couldn't remember. He tried to avoid children, he admitted. They made him nervous. He didn't know how to talk to them. The FBI brought in a polygraph examiner. Harold agreed to take the test, desperate to prove his innocence. The results came back inconclusive. Not definitive proof of lying, but not exoneration either. The examiner noted that Harold was extremely anxious, which could affect the results. But there was no evidence. No physical connection to the crime. Nothing that linked Harold to the children's disappearance except proximity and the town's suspicion. Eventually, reluctantly, they had to let him go. The damage was already done, though. When Harold returned home, he found that someone had spray-painted "Child Killer" on his garage door. His mailbox had been smashed. A brick had been thrown through his front window. Chief Harrison assigned an officer to patrol Harold Street, trying to prevent vigilante justice. But the anger in the town was palpable. People wanted someone to blame, someone to punish. Harold was an easy target. Meanwhile, other suspects emerged. Daniel Cross, a 34-year-old man who'd moved to Ridgewood 6 months earlier, had a prior conviction for assault. He'd allegedly gotten into a fight with his girlfriend's ex-husband, put the man in the hospital. Was he capable of abducting children? Police investigated. His alibi checked out. He'd been at his girlfriend's family Christmas dinner in Akron, witnessed by 24 people. Then there was Marcus Webb, a former janitor at Margaret School who'd been fired 2 years ago for stealing. He'd been bitter about it, had made some vague threats. Could this be revenge? But Marcus was in jail in Columbus, had been since December 10th on an unrelated burglary charge. It couldn't have been him. The list of persons of interest grew and shrank. Names added and crossed off as alibis were verified or fell apart. But no solid suspects emerged. No one who made sense. No one who fit the profile of someone capable of abducting 5 children simultaneously and leaving almost no trace. On December 29th, another development. A woman named Linda Pritchard, who lived in the next town over, came forward with a story. She'd been driving through Ridgewood on Christmas Eve. She said, around 6:30. She'd been lost, looking for her sister's house. While stopped at a stop sign near Maple Street, she'd seen a man walking quickly, almost running, toward a vehicle parked on a side street. What had made it memorable was that he was carrying something. A large bundle, wrapped in what looked like a blanket or tarp. She'd only seen him for a moment, her headlights briefly illuminating him before he disappeared between houses. Why hadn't she come forward sooner? She hadn't thought it was important. She'd assumed it was someone carrying Christmas presents or bags of trash. It was only when she saw the news coverage and heard about the van that she'd started to wonder. Could the bundle have been a child? Could this man have been involved? What had he looked like? Medium height. Dark clothes. She couldn't see his face. It had been too dark, too quick. Could she show them where this happened? Linda drove police to the location. Birch Street. The same street where Judith Martinez had seen the idling van. The pieces were starting to form a picture. A van on Birch Street. A man carrying something. The children disappearing from Maple Street. 1 block over. But it was still just fragments. Pieces that suggested something terrible, but didn't prove anything concrete. Who was the man? Where was the van now? Where were the children? On December 30th, the mysterious note from the church was leaked to the press. Someone, either an officer or someone who'd seen the note, had told a reporter. By evening, every news outlet was reporting it. They are safe, but you will never see them again. The words sent shockwaves through the nation. A taunting message. A confession without confession. The person who wrote this knew where the children were, and they had no intention of returning them. Margaret saw the news report and collapsed. She had to be sedated by her doctor. David punched a hole in the wall of their kitchen, then sat on the floor and wept. The note destroyed the last fragile hope they'd been clinging to. Because if someone had taken the time to write that message, to leave it in a church, they weren't planning to let the children go. Ever. The FBI analyzed the note's wording. "They are safe," suggested the writer wanted to assure people the children were alive. But, "You will never see them again" was definitive. Absolute. This wasn't about ransom. This wasn't about a confused person who might change their mind. This was someone who had a plan and was executing it with cold precision. A linguistic expert examined the phrasing, the grammar, the choice of words. The writer was educated, they determined. The sentence structure was correct, the handwriting neat. This wasn't a crime of passion committed by someone out of control. This was calculated, planned, possibly by someone who'd done something like this before. That last thought kept Agent Pierce up at night. She'd started pulling files on other unsolved child abduction cases, looking for similarities. Cases where multiple children disappeared at once. Cases with minimal evidence. Cases that went cold. She found 3. One from 1987 in Oregon. 3 children from a single family, vanished from their backyard while playing. Never found. One from 1989 in Vermont. 2 siblings disappeared from a park. No witnesses. No evidence. Never found. And one from 1985 in Illinois. 4 children from 2 neighboring families, gone within an hour of each other. No bodies. No arrests. Never solved. 5 cases, including the Miller children. 19 children total, vanished without a trace over 7 years. Was there a connection? Or was it just the terrible reality that sometimes people took children and were never caught? Pierce started mapping the cases, looking for patterns. Geographic proximity. Timing. Methods. But the cases were spread across the country, years apart. If it was the same person or people, they'd been very careful to avoid establishing a pattern. The town was paralyzed with fear. Parents kept their children inside. Schools were closed for the remainder of winter break and stayed closed even after it was supposed to end. No one felt safe. The Christmas decorations that still hung on houses looked grotesque now. Cheerful lights and wreaths mocking the tragedy that had befallen Ridgewood. The real horror hadn't even begun. Because what the investigators were starting to realize, what they couldn't yet bring themselves to say out loud, was that this case was unlike anything they'd seen before. The precision. The planning. The complete lack of physical evidence. The taunting note. They weren't dealing with a random crime of opportunity. They were dealing with someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Someone who might have done it before. And someone who had no intention of getting caught. What happened next changed everything. But the full truth comes in part 2. Subscribe now. so you don't miss it.